Alright, so we're going to look here today at arrays, messing with the DOM a little bit, and then I'll have another video to follow which touches a little bit on Hangman. So just in this first part here, we're going to check out arrays. I've just made another thing set up the same way as last time. I got this 2.5. There's a matching 2.5 JavaScript file. One thing I did here is I added a JS directory that is now storing all my scripts. Just helps a little bit for readability in terms of how I develop, right? I mean, you can do that if you want to. You don't have to. You can store them all in the same directory for this course. Doesn't really matter, but for me, it makes things easier to find. So, as you can see here, I've got this 2.5 HTML. There's nothing in it. Just a script tag being included in the head. So everything we're going to be talking about is going to be happening over here in this 2.5.js file, which is the one that's included here. And you can already see I've got it running here in the background with some data that's being output. So just kind of like going through here, I've added some comments. I've got a bunch of code commented out that we're going to see as this goes along here. But really what we want to see initially is, how do you create an array? I assume you guys all, have a background that tells you what an array is. It stores multiple values in one data structure in some orderly fashion. Orderly being that they are keyed. We'll kind of see this here in a second. But in order to create these things, there's two methods you can use. One is to say, hey, give me a new array. This first line here. The other is to just say, with two square brackets, create an array. So A and B are now both the same thing. They're both empty arrays. If you wanted to create an array of some length, if you're, you have a C background or a Java background or something like that where things are statically typed and arrays can never change lengths, you can add that in here. We could say, of length 5, and we only edit the elements that are within that, the 5 elements that we get. Otherwise, think of these arrays as more of like a vector, if you're used to a statically typed language, in that it can change length. This array, right, I initialized it at no elements, but later on I can add elements to it. So what does that look like? Well, I told you that things are indexed, and they're indexed within an array. Positionally, array indexing starts at 0, so you've got 0 as your first element, 1 is your second element, so on and so forth. So when I want to put something into the first spot here, I say, well, put it into 0, put 0 as test 1. That's one method of putting something into an array. We can also push onto the array. It'll just push it at the last spot, meaning that, for this one, we've already got something in there at spot 0. So test 2 will come in at position 1. Another way to do it is to say, hey, give me the length of A. A being an array, length being a property of that array. And the length is always one more than whatever the max index is. So, right, we've got 0 and 1 are our indexes. Our length is then 2. There's 2 actual things within it. So A at position 2 is now test 3. So we've put 3 things into A. We've got test 1, test 2, test 3. And we're going to be printing it out down here. I just used document.writeLine A with a line break, and you can see here in the background, A has test 1, test 2, and test 3 within it. Apparently test 3 has a space in it, which the other ones don't. All right. And then B, looking at kind of what's going on with B, B doesn't have anything in it. We've created it. We haven't added anything to it, and I specifically state here that at position 3, meaning the 4th index, add in this test 4, and then print it out to see what it looks like here. And you'll see when we go over to here, it said comma, 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 test 4, meaning there's nothing in position 0, position 1, position 2, until you get to position 3, then there's test 4. And you'll see it's doing the same thing here. It's adding the commas between them. Obviously I didn't add any of those. I'm just literally printing it out. So that's kind of how when you write an array to the screen how it's going to look, which is beneficial in testing, that you can write things to the screen that are arrays. Some other languages will just tell you this is an array, you can't write it. So we've seen, how to create it, how to add things to it, how to print it out, and what it'll look like. So let's look here at removing an element from it. So there's a couple ways to do this. We're really only going to talk about this one for the moment because the other ones are a little more, they do a bit more than just deleting a thing from an element, from an array. So here we've just got this delete command. We've said delete the position 1 index on A and then reprint A. So if I save this and I run it again, we'll see down here that the data within position 1 was deleted. We didn't re-index our array. We don't have, test 3 here didn't move to position 1 and we got rid of position 2. That didn't happen. So just be aware that that is what happens when you delete things. It deletes the data. It doesn't rekey the array. All right, so in the same way that we can assign something to an index position, A at 0 is now test 1, we can also print just one position, A at position 0 should be test 1, A at position 0 is in fact test 1. So you can not only do assignment on it, but you can reference it to look to see kind of what it is. All right. So moving on down here, we've got a little bit of a comment here. It says arrays with keys, associative arrays. So right now we've only got positionally indexed integer-based arrays. If we wanted to say, for example, something like this, we wanted to give a key value pair. You can't do that in arrays directly. You can't have associative arrays. We'll cover these next week because they're not really arrays in JavaScript, but they're objects of prototype class, which everything is in JavaScript. But again, more on that once we really need to cover it. So continuing down here, we've got a for loop and kind of just array traversal using a for loop. Just going to see what's in here separated by commas, right? Essentially the exact same thing that's happening when we just say, document.write A. This is, manually going through it, kind of what that's going to look like. So if I were to run that, test 1, undefined rather than, nothing, which was showing here, and then test 3. So if you have to loop over an array, right, say you want to do something to everything in the array at every position, right, this is how you would access that. We've got this loop, which you saw a bit of last week, for x starting at 0 while it's less than a.length. I told you that a.length or array.length, the property will always be one more than the maximum index within it, so we don't need to go to equals, just less than, increase our x. This just says, hey, if x is greater than 0, then add this comma, so we don't have a comma on every element, but just the ones after. So here and here. So that's a simple for loop. This is a for in loop, which you might not have seen previously, but it basically just says for x in A. And just to show you kind of what that does before I talk about it a lot, it just gives us test 1 and test 3. It doesn't give us the undefined. Reason being, there is no position 1 in A. When we quote it like this for x in A, there's only position 0 and 2. So x only ever became 0 and 2. It never became 1. So we've skipped kind of, this undefined section here because that key no longer has a value associated with it. So if you only want to reference elements within the array and you don't care about, whether they're in order, say you've got an array, and it looks something like you've got A at position 0 and it equals something, then you've got A at position 5, it equals something else, and then you've got A at position 10, which is equal to blah blah. If we were to loop over it using a simple for loop for x, whatever, we're going to have 3 things with values and 7 things or 8 things without values. If we only really wanted to touch the things that were actually in our array, we could use this for in loop. It'll only grab these values out. So that's beneficial. And again, that uses that x is still the position. It's not the actual element or anything like that, which you might have seen if you used Python or anything like that. So here's just a quick problem using some arrays. Here's the problem, right? You got to print the first 100 prime numbers. Okay, so here's my algorithm. Create an array of primes. Here it is. Run through all the numbers. Basically, we're going to loop until we've got 100 primes in this list. And just check to see if they're prime. The algorithm we're using for prime is if they're not divisible by any smaller primes than their prime. So that's some theorem somewhere. It's true. I don't know if it's been proven or not, but it does work. So then, based on that, if the number we find to be prime, add it to this array, stop running through the numbers after we get to 100 primes, right? So my max is, I don't know, some really big number here, 1 trillion or something like that. I haven't counted my zeros. But right, it's going to run up into that point unless we break out of this loop. So what's going on here? We've got this primes. I added 2 to it. Why? Because we know that 2 is the first prime. 2, 3, 5, blah, 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 right? We know some of these things, they're givens. They have to be in order to run this code. So I'm just going to loop through here, starting at 3, while less than or equal to max being 1 trillion or whatever this number is, just increase. Initially, I'm going to expect that it is true, that it is, in fact, a prime number. I'm trying to prove it false, meaning that go through and divide, this number by the previous numbers that are in primes. If any of that division has no remainder, so if you know the modulus operator here, mod, that's what most people call it, the percentage sign, it just says, if I take x and divide it by this primes at z, 2 or whatever we get in the future, does it have a remainder? If it doesn't have a remainder, then the number went in wholly. Say, for example, if our number's 4 here, and we're dividing by 2, the remainder is, in fact, 0, so then it can't be prime. So after, it runs through those, then we check and, okay, well, it's either prime or it's not prime now. If it is prime, add our number to prime. Once primes gets to 100, then stop doing what it's doing. So we could actually even add another break on here. Break just saying stop looping, right? So here we've got this for z and primes, right? Once we find out that it's not prime, there's no sense in continuing to check numbers. If I've got the number 6 and I go and I check to see that yes, 2 goes into this, right? We know we're not prime, we're never coming back to ever being prime, nothing's ever going to make this thing prime. So going on and then checking 3 for divisibility and 6, which is also going to be false, doesn't even make sense. There's no point in doing it. It's a waste of code execution time. So just break out. Stop doing this loop. So same thing's happening here. Once we get to 100, there's no sense in going all the way to 1 trillion. Just stop. We've got what we need. So down here, I'm then just building the output for x in primes. Again, I just used in. I didn't use the actual for loop. I used a for in statement. Just give me all the things and output them with commas in between. Pop off the trailing comma, blah, blah, blah. So let's see what happens when I run this thing. So yeah, here we go. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, so on and so forth, all the way out. This is 100 numbers that are all prime, up to 541 is the 100th prime number. So that's just a quick example of arrays, kind of the things you can do with them, how to loop over them, how to, a real-world example of when you might need them, how to delete things from them. That's arrays in a nutshell. All right, so next part here is the DOM. So I'm gonna switch over to this. This is a document I just created, right? It's half white, half black. So take a look at the HTML here. Just setting everything to 100% height. There's no padding, there's no width, there's none of that stuff. I'm including this 2.6 2_6 JavaScript, which we'll see here in a second. It's this file. I've added some style to make sure, hey, nothing has any padding or margin. Really just so I don't have any scroll bars here when I'm setting things to 100% heights. And then I've added 2 containers here, one for the left, one for the right. Both sit within a container. All right, pretty standard, the one on the left. He's floated left with a 50% width and height of 100%. The one on the right is floated to the right with a 50% width, a background of black, a height of 100%, a color of white, and a text align of right. All right, and the reason I've done this is just so we can set up and kind of see some of the selectors and DOM control. So that said, if we go in here and we look at 2_6.js, the first thing I'm looking into do here is using the DOM to basically say, hey, go and get these elements by their ID numbers. Or not numbers, but just by IDs. So you'll see that on these, right, this div has an ID of left, this div has an ID of right. Well, in order to interact with them in JavaScript, we need to say, what am I interacting with? Go and find it, select it, basically create an object from it using DOM traversal and return it here. So if I were to come and do this right here, I've got this left and I've got this right, and then let's say I do an alert that shows me what these two things are, and there's a reason I'm doing this. I'll talk about here in a second. So it's nothing, right? Nothing's coming up on either of those. Really nothing at all. So what you'll kind of notice as well is when I refresh this page, it pops up, and I don't really have anything on my page yet, and it says, it's spinning here. My page is essentially still loading. Once I say OK, right, it does it again. It's the pop-up for right, and it does it, I say OK to this. You're now going to see the page load. So due to the way that this is written over here, essentially, we have this script, and it's being called, and HTML runs in a top-to-bottom fashion, top-to-bottom, left to right, the same way that we read. So what's happening is this HTML is coming in here. It's saying, okay, here's the doc type, dealing with HTML, all right. We get to the head, we get to the script. Well, it pops out of here. These things don't run asynchronously. They run procedurally. So rather than going on and running any of this, it stops, and it actually goes in here and it runs whatever code we have going on in here. The problem for us at the moment, then, is once we get to here, we say document get element by ID left. If you notice, there is no element left in these 3 lines of code that exist prior to running this JavaScript, right? It doesn't get even created until down here. So what's going on basically is that this code is running, and we're telling it to go find something that does not yet exist. So there's a couple ways that we can kind of force this script to happen after these things get created. And for the sake of this class, and really not even for this class, I mean just for the sake of web development as a whole, there's a lot of methods that there's been things that have been used in the past that are no longer relevant. Really, all that you need to do is just take this code and move it down to the bottom of your code, right before the end of the body tag. Right, it's going to make your websites load efficiently. It's going to make your code run properly, and it's going to make sure that your website is non-blocking for loading data when you're also calling JavaScripts. So, that said, That's the fix for this. So if I go back and I run this again, when I pop up, nothing changed in my code, right? All I did was move this down to the bottom here, and it's now saying we have a left and a right. What are they? Well, they're HTML div element objects in JavaScript, both of them. So now that we have that done properly, I'm actually just going to go ahead and remove that. We just wanted to really get them. So now it's a question of really what can we do with this data once we've got it. And there's some links on this week's work that will show you, the properties, the methods, all the things that you can do with an element, right? This says get element, and an element is a type of node within the DOM. The document is what we're referencing, being the HTML document. Then give me this element. The element literally being here in this case a div. It could be the body itself. It could be the HTML itself. It could be the head. It could be a style tag. It could be a span, a link. There's hundreds of different HTML things. It could be, it could be the new video tags in HTML5. It could be any of those things. But for our case, what's being returned here is the div. So when the div gets returned, document.write, here we've just got an example, left.attributes. So like I said here, it's an object. Think of it for now as an array. We're just going to pop through this array for x in left.attributes, print them out. Okay, so let's see what that does if we go and we do something like that. Well, it's scrolled. It's beyond, we haven't put any data in these two things. We've just said write. So if I were to go in here, right, and I select this stuff and I say view the selection source, basically what's happened here is we've still got our page, we've left, we've got our right, and we're down here where the script is operating. We're writing out, so it's literally just writing it out here to the bottom of the body. And what did it write out? Well, it wrote out whatever these attributes on these things are, which is really irrelevant at the moment. It's just the fact that you can do it, it's there, it's possible. All right, so I'm going to comment that back out and look here at another section, which is relevant to the other assignment this week, as well as to just something that's quite commonly done. On the left and the right, both divs, we have a property called inner HTML, and the inner HTML, if we refresh this page, is now being written. Well, nothing's happening. But what the inner HTML is if we have left, right, it's whatever exists between these two tags. That's what's the inner HTML. So if we were to edit that, which we're going to do right here, then we will see, right, I've printed them out, nothing happened, obviously. All right, waste of time. Let's get rid of that. So what if we then just say, hey, I want this left inner HTML to become this the left side of the document, I want the right inner HTML to become this the right side of the document, and I come here and I refresh this page. Now you see we've added text within divs that already existed. If I view the page source, you'll notice it's not there because this page source was compiled prior to this JavaScript running. So if you're using Firefox, what you can do is select the page, right-click, and then say view selection source. It'll give you what happened, what is currently there. So what is currently there is we have this div left. It's got the same stuff. We didn't touch any of that. But then it has this inner HTML element or data inserted here by this JavaScript. Same with the one on the right. So that's a quick, this inner HTML allows you to change data that's here essentially already. It allows you to work with things that have been generated in HTML so that you don't have to constantly, rewrite entire pages or anything like that. So another thing that can be done with this is, well, now I have access to the attributes of these divs. Well, I want to mess with the style attribute. I want to change it to background green on this right side here. So if I put that in and I run it, you'll notice some stuff happened. The whole thing turned green. This is no longer right aligned. And really, if we go in here and look, the right kind of like lost all of its other style, right? It used to have float right, width, height, had all that, and it's all gone now. So we've overwritten that, which isn't what we wanted to do. What we wanted to do was to keep all of that. So if I'm going to set it to the style again, I'm going to get its style, and I'm going to adding a background of green, because I just wanted it to be white and green. So there's that. So I didn't have to delete it all. I could just take what was already there, add to it, and get that. Same can be said for the inner HTML, right? We've already added some things to the inner HTML. This is the right side of the document. If I want to add more to it, I can just reference what's currently there plus whatever I want to add on to it. So we get some more stuff added on. Can also completely override what we've already done, right? This is the left side of the document, will now be overwritten with reset. So if I run that, I still get the added on over here, I get the reset over here. So those are, some pretty common DOM functionality. Other things are available in the links and in the book and in the references, as well as, how to look at arrays and use arrays, and I think that'll be beneficial. And then in the next video, I'll cover Hangman. Thanks.